Hello and welcome to Surrendering Average. I'm your host, Joel Mahe. Today's episode is titled, Our Thorns Behind the Beauty. And I was on a deep, long, reflective walk this week when I came across this beautiful bush with red berries, and it was a great metaphor for something that transpired and still affects me in my life, which is acting on defense mechanisms. I go in depth and explain how defense mechanisms can manifest in undesirable personality traits, habits, and actions. And I want to share my story and hopefully provide some insight and light so you can take actions to not live your life through defense mechanisms. So focus in and be present as you begin to surrender your average life. Hello and welcome back to the show. I hope everyone's having a great day today. Jess and I have some exciting news as we just found out that our property in Canmore, the deal went through, everything's going to close. And it was a bit of a stressful couple weeks as there was a lot of hoops to jump through. Part of our down payment was coming from cryptocurrency, and obviously the banks don't really align with that yet. So there was a lot of intricacies and complexities that normally our deals don't involve. So there was a lot of stress. There was we took a big risk at one point where we said we were closing or we could remove conditions when there was still one condition from our lender, and going past that point we wouldn't get our deposit back, which was a substantial amount of money. So there was a little bit of stress involved, but I was confident that the deal was going to go through, so I made that call. But that led to a little bit of stress, especially for Jess, who's not as comfortable in those situations as I am. So we had to navigate those territories, and during the last week or so, there was a couple turbulent points between Jess and I, where there was a little bit of that more so fear on her end and worry and angst, and me not really being in touch and in tune with her emotions, and me just more so putting my business face on and getting the deal done. So there was a point of conflict throughout the last couple of weeks between Jess and I. And during this conflict point on one of the days, I decided to go for a walk to clear my mind, get out in nature, and just breathe through it and relax through it and really reflect on what was going on here. And during this walk, I got to a point where there's kind of an overlook over a lake and just a spot where I stopped and decided to reflect. And right in front of me, there was a nice, beautiful bush filled with red, luscious berries. And I just casually thought, well, that's a nice looking bush. I didn't think much of it. Continued to look out at the lake and reflect. And then after some reflection, I looked back at the bush and I noticed that behind all these beautiful lush leaves and berries, there was these jagged thorns, these really rugged, jagged thorns. And when we're in a deeper reflective state, that got me thinking at a bigger question and a bigger picture. And it got me thinking and reminded me of a few things that really transpired into today's episode, which is titled, Our Thorns Behind the Beauty. So a couple things that this reminded me of are we all have thorns as individuals, as humans, no matter who we are or what we have in life. Our personal thorns can include our unwanted automatic response behaviors, our habits, our beliefs, our traits, our neurological hardwiring, our automatic default system. So it's important to know that we won't necessarily get rid of these thorns, but we can let our beauty, our good attributes, our good qualities override them, such as I saw in this bush. It wasn't just this jagged, ugly bush that was only thorns. In fact, it had beautiful leaves, beautiful berries overriding those thorns. And I actually had to look deeper to see those thorns. And I just thought, what a perfect metaphor for us as humans, for us as individuals. And another thing it made me reminded me of was we have to be aware of our thorns. We can't just completely pretend that they are not there. It's kind of like knowing what our weaknesses are. It's good to know what they are in order to utilize your strengths to help you improve on them so that the thorns, undesirable traits don't run your life. It's important to be real with ourselves, to not repress and pretend those thorns don't exist, because inevitably they will resurface. And from my experience, they tend to resurface with a vengeance, with compounded impact. They come out stronger. It's not just this subtle, oh yeah, here they are, reminder of them, but when we repress them, when we pretend like they're not there, they will come out in an explosion with that compounded interest of burying them down for so long. And this was my case with my emotions, burying my emotions, avoiding difficult conversations. I didn't understand, nor did I really care to understand why I was that certain way, why I was burying them, why they were compounding, why they came out in these outlashes. I didn't fully comprehend what was going on in my life. And I eventually became aware of this, and I now utilize my strengths to help me minimize these consequences. I utilize my work ethic, my consistency, my discipline, my dedication, my determination to work on not letting my thorns control my life. Now, it's important probably the deepest realization that I came across was that I started wondering, why do plants have thorns? Like, why? That's such a random thing. They're these soft, beautiful, smelling good objects, but yet they have these sharp thorns. I'm like, there has to be a reason for this. And then I realized that they're there to protect the plant from predators. So that, a predator comes up, something that's going to eat or, get close to this plant, and they touch the thorn and it pricks them and they back away. It's a protective mechanism. And chances are that most of the thorns that we develop as humans throughout our life grew because of the same reason, to protect us. And for me, my thorns were dominant over my beauty, over my good qualities for so many years. My thorns hid who I truly was. So many good attributes of who I was because these thorns were developed. They were these restrictive, protective mechanisms, protecting the world from my true identity, which I thought the world didn't want to see. But in reality, I was completely wrong. So, as I mentioned, these defense mechanisms that I used led me to show up as a closed off, emotionally stoic person. That meant, to me, that meant that if I was stoic and emotionally closed off, that means that I would survive. That means that I would fit in. It was that tribal mentality that if you don't fit in with the tribe, then you die. Our brains develop as a very old evolution mechanism to survive. That's just how our brains are hardwired, because we needed to do that in the past to survive. So we take on these same attributes. And to me, I thought that, well, if I express my emotions and I say how I'm feeling and I'm not this stoic man, then I'm not a man, then I won't fit in. And I was wrong with that. And these defense mechanisms also led me to being angry, to being stubborn, because that's how I thought I got respect, to ensure that I am always right, because I was scared to be wrong. I was unable to be vulnerable. I saw vulnerability as a weakness. I thought men need to show strength. They don't need to be vulnerable. I had a lack of deep trust and was unable to be fully intimate. I was scared to trust. I was scared ultimately because I was scared to be left alone. So naturally, I held back. I held back from that trust, as I think a lot of men do. We're scared to give in fully. We're scared to give our full selves, to be trusted by another partner, because it's scary. We're scared to be left alone. So it's important to note that, You and myself, we're not wrong or a bad person because we develop thorns throughout our life. We all did it simply out of necessity to survive, just like the plants. It's honestly pretty crazy to think about what our mind does and how it interprets things and scenarios and circumstances along the way without us being aware of it. Our thorns are developed without us even being aware of it most of the time. It's crazy how our psychology works. And yeah, so we encountered something we didn't like or that made us uncomfortable in the past, maybe caused us anxiety. So the next time we are faced with a similar experience, our subconscious mind, with good intentions, tries to avoid the same undesirable state we experienced before, and then we unconsciously take in action to avoid this. So if we keep repeating this over and over again, our brain's just trying to do us a good thing. It's trying to keep us alive. It's trying to keep us safe. But if we keep doing these repressive actions over and over again, so we don't experience that uncomfortable state, so we don't experience that anxiety, if we do this over and over again and keep repeating it, this avoidance pattern then eventually will become our hardwired response. And when it's our hardwired response, that will impact who we are, who we show up as, what our personality develops into, which could be a very dangerous thing. As I experienced in my life, I started to become this undesirable person, this person with many undesirable traits and responses that was just protecting me. It was just shielding this more sensitive, emotional side of myself. And it really manifested in me being this angry, bitter, grumpy, emotionally locked in person, which was not desirable at all. And that's why the way to override our thorns is through our conscious mind, because they got developed unconsciously. So the only way to override that and deprogram that is through our prefrontal cortex thinking mind, not our primitive reactional unconscious mind. So we need to implement conscious awareness to think new thoughts so we can take new actions to override our thorns and undesirable traits. So I wanted to dive into this a little bit more. What I just explained there was how my defense mechanisms manifested in me showing up. They manifested it in mannerisms and personality traits that I acquired based on acting or utilizing these defense mechanisms over and over and over and over again. So I want to highlight the top 10 most commonly used defense mechanisms to hopefully bring some insight into your life and for you to maybe question and see what defense mechanisms you might be using in your life. So number one, and this is based on quite a few articles I read just to kind of gather the most 10 common ones that probably appear in most people's lives. So the first one that came up was denial. And it occurs when we refuse to accept reality or facts. You block external events or circumstances from your mind so that you don't have to deal with the emotional impact of it. In other words, you avoid painful feelings or events. Just avoid them completely, deny them that they even exist. And again, most men tend to deny or block out those external events or those external circumstances that had an impact. We just pretend that they're not there. Just deny it. And I was a victim to this as well. The second one is repression. And this is unsavory thoughts, painful memories, or irrational beliefs can upset you. So instead of facing them, you may unconsciously choose to hide them in hopes of forgetting about them entirely. That does not mean, however, that the memories disappear. They may influence behaviors and they may impact future relationships. You just may not realize the impact this defense mechanism is having. So you repress them, you bury them. And again, guilty here, I repressed everything for so long. I buried it. I put it down. I put it aside. And I thought that was just getting rid of them. I thought that because I wouldn't face them, that I'm good. I don't have to face them. They're not there. I repressed everything. But it just kept compounding and compounding. And the more I repressed and the more I held in, the more I manifested these undesirable traits, this undesirable way of living and showing up. I couldn't show up as who I was, who I authentically am, all the good qualities. My thorns were dominant. My thorns were protruding and only living outwardly rather than the beauty, rather than the good qualities of me, because I was repressing it. So in real time, we think it's actually a solution of repressing, we'll get rid of it. But in reality, it's actually just compounding. The more we repress, the bigger the problem gets, the more we will outwardly live in undesirable ways, because we're just holding so much in, we're repressing that energy, and it's truly really not healthy. And I attest to this. Like this, that's exactly what I did for so many years, and it was just detrimental to who I became and the person that I was outwardly living as. The third one is projection. Some thoughts or feelings you have about another person may make you uncomfortable. So if you project those feelings, you're misattributing them to the other person. For example, you may dislike your new coworker, but instead of accepting that and just being real with it as, hey, I don't like this guy, I don't align with their values, I don't align with their belief systems, instead of owning that, you choose to tell yourself that they dislike you, and you create this projection, you create this story, and you see in their actions the things you wish you could do or say. So you're projecting what you're actually feeling onto someone else. You're creating that story. And it's so easy to create those stories, as I've also found myself doing this before. We don't know the actual truth, and all of a sudden we're making a projection of how we actually feel towards somebody else. Now, this takes some deep analyzation and awareness to understand when we are doing this projection. Because again, all these things are usually happening at an unconscious level without us being consciously aware that we are actually doing them. It takes some deeper reflecting. It takes some deeper insight to know that, hey, I might be projecting how I actually feel here. But if we don't take the time to reflect on that, we don't normally know it's going on. The fourth main defense mechanism is displacement. So a good example of this is getting angry at a partner or a spouse or a child, your child, because you had a bad day at work. Now, neither of these people is the target of your strong emotions. Your kid's not the reason you're having these strong emotions, or your partner isn't, but reacting to them seems less problematic than reacting to, let's say, your boss if you had that hard day at work. You don't want to react to your boss because you'll get fired. So you take it out, you use displacement on somebody who's usually closest to you. Unfortunately, that's how it usually happens. And I was doing this a lot. I did this a lot. I am guilty of this. I was doing this with grumpiness and how I showed up cold in my relationship after my work day. I would go to work and I would really try to show up with a great attitude, be super nice, be super friendly to everyone at work, even if I didn't have a relationship with them. I would just go over the top being nice and making sure I fit in, making sure I was keeping up appearances, whatever it was. But the craziest part is that I would come home to my loved one, to Jess, and I would act the opposite. I would almost absorb all this negative energy throughout work, because I worked in the trades. I do work in the trades, and there's a lot of, especially back then, there's so much bad energy, just rudeness, grumpiness, mean. Like, there's a lot of the times that people aren't working for each other. They're not working on the same team. If you're working with other trades, there's a lot of animosity. There's a lot of frustration, and I would just absorb this, and I would never outlash it on them. But I would come home and I held all this energy throughout the day, and I was just exhausted because I was there trying to be nice, trying to be happy, trying to put on a good face for everyone else. And then I'd come home almost just exhausted and instead of displacing this energy and these emotions towards the people who were actually causing me to feel this way, I would displace that and outlash it towards Jess. I would displace those emotions onto Jess. I'd be cold. I'd be grumpy. How everyone else treated me at work, treated everyone else at work, I would now displace that energy and those emotions towards Jess. And again, like without being aware of what was going on, it was just how it was. I would just say, "Oh, I don't have the energy. I can't show up better. Yeah, sorry, Jess." And I would leave all that and just displace all that onto her. Now, how unfair is that? I know. It took a lot of work and reflecting to understand A, what was going on, and B, how to take new actions to not let my thorns protrude once again. The fifth self-defense mechanism is regression. So some people who feel threatened or anxious may unconsciously escape to an earlier stage of life or just to an unhealthy habit. Adults who are struggling to cope with events or behaviors may return to overeating foods that they really like that aren't necessarily good for you, but they find comforting, or they indulge in activities they know aren't good for them. They may avoid the activities they do know are good for them because they feel too overwhelmed by them. So an example of this that everyone probably uses is going to your phone or turning on Netflix because the task you should be doing seems too difficult, or you seem like you don't have enough energy for it. This is such a common one. Probably the most common one is regression. We feel threatened or anxious, and we want to escape to something easier or something that's usually more unhealthy for us. So that's a very common one that we use. The sixth one is rationalization. Now, some people may attempt to explain undesirable behaviors with their own set of facts. Now, this allows you to feel comfortable with the choice you made, even if you know on another level it's not right. And I, again, and still am, the victim of rationalization. I will rationalize to myself why my behavior is justified. For example, get angry at your partner because they aren't fulfilling your love language or your needs and desires, when really you might be ignoring the fact that you also are not fulfilling their needs. But you're rationalizing every reason why your needs desired, but you're not looking at the truth and the reality of the situation and taking ownership that, oh shit, I'm actually not doing that for you either. We rationalize and justify why it's important for us without us utilizing empathy and looking at the totality of the experience of especially in a relationship. We tend to rationalize, we tend to justify our actions, and I think we're all a bit guilty of that on some level. The seventh one is sublimation. And this type of defense mechanism is considered a positive strategy. And again, I use this a lot, and I'm not against this. Because people who rely on it choose to redirect strong emotions. And when I mention strong emotions, that's like anger, hate, those dark, heavy emotions, frustration, grumpiness, being cold, everything I still experience on some level. But you channel those, or you redirect those into an object or activity that is appropriate and safe, such as going to the gym or going for a run or doing yoga. And I don't think this is a bad thing. I think this is an amazing thing, as long as we don't repress, as I mentioned earlier, as long as we're not burying it, as long as we're not avoiding it, I like to use sublimation to get me in a better mind state, get those endorphins moving, make me feel better, so then I can face the emotions that I was feeling, so I can analyze them, so I can talk to Jess about what I'm experiencing. Because if I come into a conversation without redirecting that heavy, strong, hard emotions, then I'm going to be more reactional in that conversation, and I'm going to react to those emotions and lead with those strong emotions rather than getting that movement, exercising, feeling better. And now I have a higher level of consciousness and awareness where I can really reflect and talk those things through. So I think it's a great tool, as long as we aren't going to the gym and repressing what we felt. We still need to deal with everything we're feeling and understand why it's happening. Don't just go to the gym and redirect it onto something else and then forget about it. We can't repress it. So I think this is an important, this is a useful defense mechanism as long as we aren't repressing our emotions. The 8th one is reaction formation. So people who use this defense mechanism recognize how they feel, but they choose to behave in the opposite manner of their instincts. So a person who reacts this way, for example, may feel they should not express negative emotions such as anger or frustration, those strong emotions. They choose to instead react in an overly positive way, not fully processing what is actually going on. So some people overcompensate, and instead of outlashing in anger or frustration, they overcompensate with joy and happiness. And again, this is kind of like my what I mentioned to at work. When I was frustrated or when I was angry, I didn't outlash that onto coworkers or other trades workers. I chose to instead react in an overly positive manner, not fully allowing myself to absorb what's going on. And it led to that compounding effect that led me to show up with that grumpiness, that coldness, that holding everything in is when I got home to my loved ones. So that's reaction formation. The 9th one is compartmentalization. And this is separating your life into independent sections. And it may feel like it's a way to protect you from different elements of your life. Let's hide one thing, such as when you choose not to discuss your personal life issues at work. You block off or compartmentalize that element of your life. And of course, depending on our job, we probably don't want to necessarily bring our deep problems to work. Those need to be resolved usually in a safe manner, not with people who maybe are strangers. But compartmentalizing allows you to carry on without facing the anxieties or challenges while you're in that setting or mindset. So if you compartmentalize and just choose to ignore them and not discuss them or not even show that they're there, that's a way of repression. You're compartmentalizing. You're saying, oh, okay, I can focus on work, so I don't need to worry about my home life or my home problems. But when we're real with them and say, yeah, you know what, like I am struggling right now. I am dealing with some things and it's affecting me. We can't compartmentalize, just shut one thing off completely, go from one thing to the other and just forget about it. That includes some sort of repression, and it's not a healthy coping mechanism. We can't just pretend like it's not there. We can't just compartmentalize and just focus on work and everything will be okay. And the 10th and final one, which is what I saw as the most popular defense mechanisms, is intellectualization. And this is when you're hit with a difficult situation, let's say, and you remove all of your emotions from your responses instead of focusing on what actually is, what the facts are, how you actually feel. You may see this strategy when, let's say, a person loses their job. And instead of actually reflecting and getting in tune with their emotions, how they're feeling, what actually transpired here, they go and choose to spend their time creating spreadsheets of job opportunities and leads. They use intellectualization, facts and numbers to justify how they're feeling or justify how they're going to get out of it, instead of actually reflecting, digesting, feeling what's going on, processing, and working through that. So I just wanted to describe those 10 top defense mechanisms because I've seen how they impacted my life, and those are going to be the root causes of how we show up in life. And a lot of these defense mechanisms I utilized over and over and over again, and that eventually turned me into or manifested into undesirable personality traits, habits, beliefs, whatever it may be. It actively, truly happened to me. So I just wanted to let you in with how those affected me, how they manifested in my life, and hopefully that brings some insight into how it might be affecting your life. So here's a couple questions to help you reflect on all this. What might be some potential thorns in your life? What areas of your life are getting affected by those thorns or defense mechanisms? How might those defense mechanisms be manifesting into undesirable personality traits, habits, beliefs? Do your thorns serve you or inhibit you? Who might I become if I can lean on my strengths and override my thorns? And how will my life be better without being the victim of my thorns? So I hope you all gathered some insight, some sort of insight from this podcast episode. That is always my intention, to share what's going on in my life, to share my story, to be vulnerable, to share openly, in the hopes that men or anyone listening can find some help, some insights, some inspiration, some motivation behind what I'm saying, to hopefully enable you to take new actions in your life. And on that note, if my podcasts, if my messages resonate with you, please dig into coaching. Check out my website at joelmahe.ca. Feel free to reach out to me to my email at coaching@joelmahe.ca. Check me out on Instagram. My tag is just JOELMAHE. I'd love to connect. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear if my message is having any impact on your life whatsoever. I absolutely love getting messages from people saying, keep doing what you're doing. I love that you're sharing your message. It's those kind words that keep me coming back and keep me working on this, keeping me progressing in this work field that I've chosen in coaching. So in closing, I just want to leave you with a few words. And, we will thrive when we are living our life with fewer restrictions. We will have greater potential to experience our full range of emotions. This includes joy, happiness, and a higher tolerance for intimacy. We will be able to live more authentically, more liberated, and can remove the necessity to hide our true selves and desires. It's time to lead with our beauty rather than reverting to our thorns. Reflect on this, knowing that you don't need to revert to any defense mechanisms to survive. Move forward in life with conscious intentions to improve on this. Have faith and trust that experiencing all of your emotions will in fact help you to live a more aligned and authentic life. In doing this, you will surrender your average life. Thank you so much for listening, and have an amazing day.